Over 75% of returning veterans suffer from PTSD. This is the story of Corporal Andre Alvarez and his struggle.
I grew up in a family with pretty much nothing but females. I always had my dad around, but he was the main provider for the family. So he was always gone working late hours, early in the morning. Um, so growing in a house full of females, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but I really had to take the role of pretty much being the man of the house. And it's something that my life always focused around. So when I finally grew up, um, going through high school, it took me a while to decide what I really wanted to do with myself. And seeing how broke down my family was at the time, I felt like we weren't going to have enough money to ask them to put me through college. And so I took it upon myself to look for options. And one of the biggest options was the military. It's something that stood out to me. And the biggest branch that stood out was the Marine Corps because I wanted to be the best, and that's what they offered. So I decided to join them for one, to travel and see the world, and also to be able to get an education out of it. When I finally decided to join the Marine Corps, it took me a while to decide exactly what I wanted to do while I was in. And talking to the recruiter, well, I actually talked to multiple recruiters, and they all offered different perspectives. One was a motor T guy, the other was infantry. Um, and the one thing that really attracted me was going into the infantry. I felt like being on the front lines is something I wanted to do. Um, as I said in my childhood, I mean, I was the man of the house. I was always there, helping and providing. So I figured being on the front lines would be almost the same thing. I'd be center of attention, front lines, being there for everybody. And so when it came down to it, I decided to go in infantry, and everything was ready for me to go. By the time I left, I went through boot camp, did my 13 weeks, went to SOI, and shortly after that was came my first tour to Iraq. And at the time I was single, so it really didn't bother me much. I didn't even think about it. I kind of just went in there headstrong, thinking I was the best in the world. And eventually my tour came to an end. We all came back. My whole unit came back. Everything was fine. And during my time home, um, that's when I met my wife, and I felt like things changed after that. Um, I I went back to my unit, and I came back a little bit more scared, a little bit more worried, and I think it's because of the fact that I didn't want something to happen to me and have to put my wife through something like that. And so going into my second tour back to Iraq, it was hard. It was different. I felt different. Um, Things didn't feel the same anymore. During that second tour, I lost a few friends. I did run into an IED, and I think that's when things really started to affect me in a negative perspective. And when I came back from the second deployment, things just things at home just weren't the same anymore as well. Everything had changed for me, and it wasn't so much myself that realized that. It was my friends and my family around me that really noticed the changes and tried to help pursue me to get help. But I don't think I was able to wrap my head around it enough to really think that I needed help. I think being in large crowds was the most difficult thing that I had to overcome. You know, one of the issues being that, I felt like someone was trying to hurt me or follow me, something along those lines, really affected me being in a crowd. I felt I couldn't keep my eyes on everybody at all times, and it would bring on these anxiety feeling, just being so anxious that somebody was going to try and hurt me. And that I would have to say that was the hardest thing to overcome. just so many people constantly everywhere, you know. And so I had to seclude myself. I spent a lot of time alone, and if I wasn't alone, you know, I would be in a controlled state where I only had, you know, maybe 3 4 people around me at any time, you know, and I can constantly see what they were doing. um, Anything that I do, there's nobody behind me. If I go and sit in a classroom, I have to sit in the back with my back to a corner, just to avoid having anybody stand behind me. If somebody starts walking, you know, towards my back or behind me, you know, I have to constantly be looking and seeing what they're doing. And being in those crowds was just the worst. You know, not knowing what could happen at any moment, anything could happen, and trying to keep your eyes on everybody, trying to keep control of everything, and you just can't. And shortly after that is when I found, you know, I went and picked up a shelter dog. And I adopted a little dog, and he kind of changed my life. And after a while, taking the time to train him properly, I decided to make him my service dog. And so we went and got further training, and that kind of helped me the most because I got to learn with him. I got to learn a new perspective of things, having more patience, um, you know, being able to teach my dog all kinds of tricks and things to do to help me out, and he's become like my biggest friend now. That's the person that I pretty much turn to.